Yeah, all right, next item is a conceptual discussion with Pillsbury Realty Development LLC. This is, right now, it's the Woodmont Commons PUD master plan, and this is going to be quite a lengthy process. The first part is really what they have to come up with is a master plan, and our PUD basically calls that this master plan of what's going to be constructed has to be consistent with the town itself. And I know Mike Kettenbach is here. He had a nice quotation what was in the paper, I think, from the very first day of the charrettes that we had back in beginning of September. And that they're looking for a sustainable, long-term development that is a benefit to the entire community. And I think that is, I think, a good place to start. This is probably what we're going to be doing is probably more procedural at the beginning, but usually conceptual discussions, and this is how I feel. I do let the public ask questions and make comments. And when after we have the presentation, we'll have the board go through its stuff with the staff, and then I'll ask members of the public if they have any questions, comments, concerns, or whatever. What I'd like is something germane to the issue that we're discussing here tonight. But only speak when recognized by the chair. Come forward to a microphone. You have to identify yourself, name, address, and everything. So we'll operate that way. But I want to kind of keep this as an informal discussion. And a conceptual discussion by statute is basically an exchange of ideas between a developer and the planning board. And there's no decisions are made, and it's nothing's binding at all. So. And I know Tim has stuff to say, too.
Just give a little bit of a background, again, on the ordinance and the process that is really beginning tonight. Specifically in the ordinance in Section 283, we spell out the process, and really where we're at right now is the conceptual discussion stage with the planning board. What I expect to take place here tonight is a back and forth between the applicant and the board, and the staff to discuss, the format, the materials that are required to be in the PUD master plan, some general discussion about the overall scheme and plan for the project. But ultimately, I think what we need to get a handle on tonight is how we want to proceed forward with this. I think it makes sense, given the fact that this is the first PUD that's before the town, the first use of this ordinance, that we take a very measured approach to this. My suggestion is that after we go through this conceptual discussion tonight, it may make sense to take this project into pieces, look at, if I scroll to what's required to be included in a PUD master plan, the list is quite extensive. We have 25 different specific requirements that are required submission items as part of a PUD master plan. It's not just the picture, the plan layout itself. It's also coming up with a written document that comes up with the rules and regulations that this particular project would then fall under, because the way the PUD master plan works is if it is approved by the planning board, it essentially becomes the zoning for this particular project. So I think what the applicant is here tonight is to give the board their initial ideas on the template and formatting of the particular process and the proposal. And I think we may look at potentially holding some monthly workshop meetings on this in the interim before we progress forward to a public hearing. With that, ask the applicant to move.
Okay, you have the floor. Just name and address for us, please. Yep. Whatever's most comfortable.
Great.
Or make people feel at home, It's
Fine. For the record, my name is Michael Kettenbach. I'm the general partner and owner of Pillsbury Realty Development LLC, the owner of Woodmont Orchards and other properties here in the community on both the east and the west side of I-93. As Tim pretty much covered the bases right here as to why we're here tonight, we are here to start the general consensus of how we're going to proceed in a PUD, and knowing full well that this is our first time in front of the community, and this is the first time that that this board has been involved in a PUD. We know that the process is going to take multiple meetings, and we're here to work with you. We're available to you at any time. We're available to come for any meetings at any time. We're willing to break it out into workshops and individual groups as well. And we'd like this to be an open and productive process, because it's a very large project, and it's something that deserves the attention of all of us and needs to be done right, because it's going to set the framework for the future for other projects like this, not only in your community, but in other communities. We've also heard from numerous other communities who are monitoring this so that they could use this process themselves in their development. So we're kind of setting a standard for the state, if you might look at it that way, for other development in the state of New Hampshire and other communities. And I think that's one of the reasons that we wanted to be so forthcoming in the charrette process, and to inform people as to what this process is approaching. And I think we did there's always mixed bags as to the approach, but I think ironing out a lot of the things in the public forums that we held earlier only helped us to get to this point as well. And I hope that we have the same openness and desire to try and work with the community as we have had in the past, and that the community was as forthcoming in their comments to us as they were at the charrette. And I think with that in mind, I think we can both come to something that we can live with and be proud of and use as a model elsewhere as well. With that said, I'm here tonight with Rick Chelman, who I think a number of you met at the charrette. Rick is from Portsmouth and has been involved all over the world and in the country, and has worked extensively with DPZ and Robert Gibbs and others in the planning of intermodal transportation and these urban designs. And he's here to answer questions tonight and to start the process. He has been already working with your staff and trying to develop a framework or a skeleton so that we can proceed as we move along in this process. And I think that's why we're here tonight. And at this time, I would turn it over to Rick, because he's had so much experience doing this, and the staff has been working with him to try to develop this framework that I think I'd like him to kind of take over now and go over the overview and then start the process. Thank you.
Okay.
I'm taking it that you guys have computer screens you can look at?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, not having been here before, wasn't sure about that. As Mike mentioned, my name's Rick Chelman. I live in Portsmouth. I'm a sole practitioner. I'm an engineer and licensed land surveyor here in the state. Work pretty far-ranging, in this country and outside this country. But this is a big project, and it's certainly, it's not the biggest project I've ever worked on stretch, but it's certainly the biggest New Hampshire project that I've worked on. I thought it might be useful just to share a few quick images to set the tone, and then at the end of these, we have, I've brought in images from the package that I believe you guys downloaded this afternoon, the PDFs that Tim sent you the link.
PDFs in their screens. Yep.
Basically, we're talking about the difference between isolated, independent, auto-only access land uses versus a place that's more walkable, bikeable, mixed-use buildings, much like downtown Portsmouth. And these Portsmouth images, I just ask that you, as you think back and you look at these images, and as you think back to your times you've walked around and driven around Portsmouth, put your planning board hat on and think about how you might be able to create places like that. And that's what I've tried to do with this draft master plan package. That the Popovers building was infill within the last, I think, 6 or 7 years. That used to be a parking lot in Eagle Photo. Very dramatically transformed that part of Market Square. Lots of pedestrians. And think of this, it's aerial from the south end, the difference between this type of residential neighborhood versus the typical cul-de-sac community. Downtown Portsmouth is what we call a park once environment. We hope to have parts of Woodmont also be a park once, where literally people who get there by car drive to a parking spot and then walk around and access multiple uses on foot. Very different than, suburban sprawl. That was during the charrette. That's my radar gun, 41 miles an hour. Speed is an issue when you're trying to make a place more pedestrian-friendly. This is a concept of what's called optical width. If you go from the bottom to the top, and if you think about it as drivers, when the buildings are up close to the street, you tend to slow down because the optical width of the street is narrowed. And it's a much more friendly place for pedestrians as well. Technically, those 20 is plenty signs, there's actually science behind it. If there's an accident involving a motor vehicle and a pedestrian, and the car is going 20 miles an hour or less, the pedestrian who got struck is usually not permanently hurt. If that car is going about 36 or 37 miles an hour, they're usually killed. So if you now pay attention to the speedometer as you're driving around, it's very easy to get going basically lethal speeds very quickly unless you've detailed the streets appropriately. And this is, keep your eye on the car. It shows you what the different environment can be just basically using Photoshop. And I guarantee you that car would drive much differently on that street than that one. It also makes a big difference in terms of issues like air quality and VMT. I found from an analysis of downtown Portsmouth that the exact same land uses assembled in a suburban manner will generate more than twice as much daily traffic. The question came up with staff the other day, can you build this new? And the answer is yes, you can. This is a project I worked with DPZ in Gaithersburg, Maryland, called Kentlands. It's a 1988 rendering on the left and a 2003 aerial on the right. And the only thing that's been photo touched in the one on the right is making the water look more blue. But it's a real place. None of this was here 20 years ago. John Michaels has shared a lot of history books with me for Londonderry. I haven't gotten through all of them yet, but certainly a rich tradition here. When you look at these renderings that DPZ did, again, think back to look and feel, form, and does it feel good to you? Does this seem like a good thing, or and we can come back to it. That's the the old packing building where we had the charrette. This is the east side of 93, sort of an Italian hill town. And again, it's the details of the buildings up to the street, pedestrian scale, parking to the rear. The rules of urbanism are not complex, but they need to be followed. And in this particular rendering, that street in the middle has been drawn too wide. So we did have the charrette, but that's not why we're here. This is why we're here. And I've been actually very much looking forward to this first discussion with the board. I was on a planning board up in Tufton Borough for 9 years myself, so I know what it's like on the other side of the table. What I've tried to do, and staff has been very helpful giving input, is create two documents. There's a series of the PDFs that you receive, but I bound them in two sets. One's an 11 by 17 set of basically plan views, and the other is 8.5 by 11. That's going to be the sort of the rules for how this could work. So the first page, TND1 of the master plan, lists the overall list of land uses that are blown up on the right. And the commercial numbers are pretty much largely from Bob Gibbs' market analysis. The dwelling unit count of 1,300 were open to input from the board. I heard from several people during the charrette that they thought that more housing was needed for affordable and seniors. So that's a dialogue we can have. The project will be all on sewer and water, so it's not an issue. And the PUD allows up to 6 dwelling units per acre, which would be over 3,000. The next level just sort of made sense to me since we've got 93 through the middle. that the first sort of breakdown would be with that which lies west of 93 and that which lies east of 93.